didn't even let me know about this flight being canceled, and now all my plans are changed by one day, and the cost of rebooking all this stuff and doing it, I mean, could be hundreds of thousands. So what happens if I decide to go that route? Wow, what an intro, right? So in the last 2 years, I've flown over 10 international flights, from class fares, from economy, premium economy, business class, and first class, and not once did I have an issue with my flight. But in the course of 2 weeks in January 2025, I had 2 award flights where I had major flight issues, and in fact, both of those flights were canceled. So in this video, what are we going to do when a flight is canceled? Do we get compensation? I'm going to tell you my experience and what you should do when a flight is canceled or delayed. Feel free to use the chapters in this video and navigating through the specific examples of my situations, whether it's the flight delays or the cancellations. So the first thing you need to do when your flight is significantly delayed or canceled is to go to the Department of Transportation website from whatever country you're departing from, whether it's the United States, Canada, Europe, France, or Australia. Generally, when you get to the Department of Transportation website, like from America, you can find the airline, look at all the scenarios on which you can get compensation, and that should tell you whether you get compensated for a canceled flight or a delayed flight. And basically for USA, if you see a green check, that means you can be compensated, and of course the X means you cannot be. Personally, recently I actually flew Delta Airlines a while ago, and guess what? My flight was significantly delayed for how long? 6 hours. So gross. It was so bad that I was supposed to arrive in New York from Atlanta at around just before 5 p.m., but actually ended up arriving at 11 p.m. Eastern Time that same day. So I went to the DOT website and I looked for Delta Airlines. Looked up all my scenarios, especially the ones for my situation, which was being delayed for more than 3 hours, and I found out I could be compensated for my flight situation. Before I go further, please keep in mind that there are a couple exceptions from airlines that you cannot be receiving, extra compensation from the airline that are known as uncontrollable situations, such as weather delays from Mother Nature, security issues, and of course, air traffic control. But for my situation specifically, it was actually an aircraft issue, so I would be compensated based on the Department of Transportation website. So now that I know that Delta will compensate me, you go to Delta's website, I'll show you the link here, delta.com/reimbursement. It'll do the same kind of stuff, show you all the prompts, all scenarios, if you can be compensated. I'm scrolling down here. And then there's also a form for reimbursement, which you can do for any purchases. And for my example, I did purchase food as shown here from Delta. And this is the kind of stuff that you just have to submit to get reimbursement for your purchases, since my flight was delayed more than 3 hours. The funny thing is, right before I submitted my reimbursement form through the Delta website, I actually got a communication via email from Delta that I got a meal voucher at the airport. The cost was $15, which I gladly used. And so it made me think, should I still submit that reimbursement form? Why not? Hey, maybe I'll double dip and I'll get both benefits. So I submit the reimbursement form. And for the form, really, it's really pretty simple. You fill one part about your name, your information, that kind of stuff. And number 2, you just fill out your flight information, which you should have. If you did it right, you should receive communication from Delta that it is in progress. And of course, they do provide you a hyperlink if you want to check the status of your reimbursement. For my personal example, it took about 1 day for them to review my reimbursement request, and guess what? Approved. I got approved for my $15 amount I spent on food at the airport, and yes, that is the reason why you should always submit a reimbursement request whether you think you're unsure or not. So now let's talk about what you should do when your flight is canceled, as I have 2 examples from January 2025, and let's see if I should be compensated or not. So for my first flight that I got canceled, it was a last minute flight. I booked to fly from America to Australia. I literally booked it on January 9th to fly on January 9th. And it was departing from Dallas-Fort Worth to Brisbane, Australia, which I booked with Alaska Air Miles. Please keep in mind, I did have a backup flight already booked with United Polaris from San Francisco to Brisbane, but I chose Dallas-Fort Worth because it's closer to my home airport. And honestly, I wanted to try American Airlines and this new route with them, and also fly that 787-9 Dreamliner from American Airlines. So once my flight was booked, it was getting pretty bad quickly, as I got notification from American Airlines. It was showing my flight was, what was happening? A gate change. Okay, that's fine. Soon after that, I got a notification that my flight was delayed for 4 hours, and then it was delayed for 8 hours, and then 12 hours, and then 17 hours, and then, well, we know where all this is going right now. my flight was canceled. So can anyone guess why my flight was canceled from American Airlines? Well, if anyone was living in Texas, specifically like Dallas, around that first week in January in 2025, well, they were going through a bit of an issue with the weather. Yes, a snowstorm was hitting Dallas at that time, that first week on January 8th, 9th, 10th, and any flights coming in or out of Dallas Fort Worth was canceled. And so, showing my text message here, guess what? It was canceled from weather. So the question is, do I get compensated for my flight being canceled by Mother Nature? Well, no. It's one of the few reasons an airline will not give me extra compensation for a flight being canceled by weather. Though, of course, they will let me cancel and I'll get my money back, which I did, as I booked it with the War Points to Alaska Air. So I got back my 75,000 to 85,000 points back, and of course the tax and fee I paid as well. But don't worry, I did still go to Australia in January, had a great time. I flew United Polaris, actually to and from Australia, had an amazing experience, and also visiting Melbourne for the Australian Open in January 2025. Anyway, let's move on to my second canceled flight situation. So for my second canceled flight situation, this is the reason why this video took 6 months in the making. Please keep in mind of the timeline for this situation for my canceled flight. So this situation involved P2. She was in Australia as well in January, and she was supposed to depart from New Zealand on December 31st, 2024 back to America, LAX, on a flight we booked on points with Avianca Life Miles to fly Air New Zealand business class. Also, please keep in mind we did book a separate economy flight from LAX to Atlanta as well, which was not connected with the business class flight. Also, please keep in mind that New Zealand is about 13 to 14 hours ahead of USA, specifically towards the Eastern time zone. So here's where the fun began. So around 8 a.m. on December 30th, 2024, which is in the USA, Monday for me, work time, going through my spiel, getting through work, checking emails, I decided to check the flight size of P2 because she's in New Zealand, and remember, they're a day ahead, so it's already the day of departure for them. So I checked some flight updates and I find out, shoot, this flight looks canceled. Is this really true? So at this point, I haven't received any form of communication from Air New Zealand her flight's canceled, so I wanted to prepare myself before I contact them and review the airline policies and any other things I could do to make sure she may receive extra compensation. So I did some research immediately and realized that the canceled flight situation had nothing to do with an uncontrollable event. I knew at that time Australia was going through plane issues due to landing and gear, so I knew it was either aircraft or mechanical issue. So I made sure that I know we could receive extra compensation. So what did I do next? Well, first you want to look up the policies of the country you're departing from. And for this example, we are departing from New Zealand. So I looked up the policies on New Zealand, and it wasn't really great, especially for international long hauls. Nothing specific on extra compensation for canceled flights, but I wanted to be aware in case I called them very soon. They also mentioned the verbiage of Montreal Convention, which I did look up, and that didn't have anything to do with my situation. It was more about death and bodily harm, so just want to make a note there as well. So 2 more things before I call the airline is 1, review the airline policies. Because my situation is a bit complex as I'm talking right now, I booked points and miles, not cash. I booked with Avianca Life Miles, which I have to call them probably, and I'm flying Air New Zealand. So there's 2 airlines. I want to make sure I review those airline policies before I call Air New Zealand as well. And lastly, just like if option 1 fails, as I mentioned recently, in my delayed Delta flight, make sure you have checked your credit card and see if it has travel insurance to help you get compensated as well. And that's what I'll do, because I know we booked the taxes with the City Strata. And remember, in the points and miles game, it's not free. You may pay the flight with points, but the taxes you're always responsible, whether it's $5 to $100 or more. So I pulled up the airline policies for Air New Zealand or Avianca, and I'm not going to lie, there was nothing specific about extra compensation for canceled flights, and just more of the general information about what they would do if your flight is canceled, which means they would help you rebook for no extra cost. As for the credit card issue and the taxes, Player 2 did use a City Strata, and so that goes to the World Elite MasterCard program, and just reviewing the policies, going through it, and making sure aware of it is very important. It's making a note of the specific numbers and the policies, because a lot of the credit card companies in this space, such as AdventureX, Amex Platinum, Chase Sapphire Reserve, all have separate travel insurance policies for like one-way flights, the amount, delayed bag insurance, trip cancellation, and trip interruption. A great example of this is the American Express Platinum has travel insurance coverage for round-trip flights. So you want to make sure when you are using this card, make sure you're booking a round trip flight and not one-way flights. Now that we understand some of the policies, let me call Air New Zealand and see what's going on. So I finally called Air New Zealand around 10 a.m. my time, like I said, December 30th, and the phone call was anything but simple. Air New Zealand did confirm my flight was indeed cancelled, and to recap the flight details, it was flying from Auckland to LAX, leaving on December 31st at 7:40 p.m. and landed in Los Angeles around 10:30 in the morning on the same day. That's about a 12-hour flight, I believe, with Air New Zealand, business class. The funny thing is I chatted with the agent and I found out that in the background they were already trying to rebook P2 with another flight through Delta, which was, I think, departing around 2:45 that same day. And you were landing LAX at about 6 in the morning. And it was Delta One business class, which was nice. But guess what? I found out too that flight was canceled as well. And the funny thing is, as I show here, Delta ended up emailing us a survey of our flight experience and also if we deserve reimbursement even though the flight was canceled. So we'll talk about that part very shortly as well. So the agent from Air New Zealand gave us two primary options. Leave on the same day around 11:40 p.m. in New Zealand, and you'd be flying Delta One, which is great, business class, but you would arrive in Los Angeles at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The other option was, if I wanted to take it, was leaving about 8:10 p.m. on Air New Zealand Economy, and you would arrive, LAX around 11 o'clock in the morning. So those are the two options, but here's the caveat. As I mentioned in the beginning, P2 had a positioning flight booked already from LAX to Atlanta, and that leaves around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So there was a dilemma, fly business class or economy, and then potentially missing that positioning flight. Meaning that if player 2 chose that Delta 1 flight, which left so late during the day, she would miss her positioning flight back from LAX to Atlanta and would be responsible for those out-of-pocket costs, whether it's food or hotel, since Air New Zealand is not responsible for those costs because they already got her to LAX. Or fly back in economy with Air New Zealand but then missing out on business class, and that's a long 12-hour flight in economy knowing that you booked with business class with that airline. So in the end, it's really about making your flight, going through economy, or flying business as you want, but then missing your positioning flight and then paying out of pocket. So in the end, player 2 decided to go with option number 2, which is flying back in economy with Air New Zealand. Because she wanted to make that positioning flight back to Atlanta, she would be forfeiting her business class flight since Air New Zealand did offer the same class fare but from a different airline. And also too, when she did layover in LAX, she did make some food purchases, so we're going to use that and see if we can get reimbursement for that as well. So at this point, do we think player 2 should receive extra compensation for the inconvenience by Air New Zealand? In my opinion, I do think she does, even though she gave up her business class flight for economy. But let's find out what happened. So this is where the 6-month time gap starts from her flight ending to right now. And we'll start with the easiest to hard part. Easiest part really is that Delta Airlines, how we had a canceled flight right here, Delta 1. It was canceled pretty quickly, but they still gave us a survey, they gave us an email, filled out their reimbursement form, and well, player 2 did. Remember, she bought food at the airport, she submitted Delta, so you can get reimbursed, and what happened? Well, she got denied. Not surprised. I mean, they probably ended up finding out she didn't fly that flight, so she wasn't eligible for reimbursement. That's the first thing we did in trying to get reimbursement for her flight. So the next option is to try to get some type of extra compensation or reimbursement to the Citi Strata card with MasterCard and the World Elite MasterCard program. So we went through the prompt, we went to the MasterCard website. It's a pretty long process, a lot of questions they asked. We submitted the inquiry, and in the end, what happened with MasterCard and their program? Well, and she got denied. I wasn't really surprised because I looked at some of the travel insurance for MasterCard, and it does say that they actually cover round-trip flights, and she mistakenly booked just one-way flight. So I knew we probably weren't going to get reimbursed, as shown here with the 2 reasons. And then also they said that MasterCard felt like the responsibility should be on the airlines to cover that reimbursement, which they're kind of right though. And on the topic of airlines, it's time to move on and contacting which ones? Both airlines, Air New Zealand and Avianca. I started with Avianca because they're the airline I flew with, right? So I submitted 2 online inquiries just to keep it safe and make sure I have case numbers to have as proof to talk to the customer service team. And it's going to be really confusing because I have no idea how Air New Zealand is going to compensate me because I booked a flight with Avianca Life Miles, their Star Alliance partner. So a couple of days later, Air New Zealand responded back to me and said that I should not receive full compensation because technically P2 did fly back with Air New Zealand on economy, but they did agree that since she did fly economy, she should get the fair difference in compensation, meaning business class minus economy. However, Air New Zealand realized that they weren't the ones that were getting paid for the flight, so they did also inform me that the compensation that I'm requesting needs to be done through the third-party agent or the airline for that booking. And now this is where it gets complicated with Avianca Airlines. It gets complicated because, like I said, I used their life miles or travel points to book this flight. And if you've seen a previous video of mine, they have one of the worst, if not worst, customer service, from contacting through WhatsApp, through the phone, so many long wait times, and of course also being just dropped from their calls from their customer service team. So let's get on the communication with Avianca. So I started the process of submitting an online inquiry and also calling them, and as a result of my first of many attempts, Avianca came back via email and said, no, we shouldn't compensate you because you didn't fly our airlines, but yet I used your miles. So confusing. So that's the first attempt in contacting Avianca Airlines for compensation. So at this point, after contacting many outlets, credit cards, airlines, all that stuff, if you want to give up, I totally understand, but knowing that I have about 40,000 Avianca life miles online, I decided to keep fighting for that compensation. At this point, after submitting some online inquiries to Avianca, I gave up and just decided to call them or contact them through WhatsApp, which didn't really go anywhere, so calling them was definitely your number one option. As calling with them, I was being tossed like a hot potato from the phone, being tripped from agent to agent, and in some miracle, after being denied a lot of my phone calls, and after that, I asked to be escalated to a supervisor, Monica. Shout out to her because she really helped me out and told me basically if I can somehow submit documentation that I actually was not flying my original class for business and flew economy back, I could get compensation. So a glimmer of hope in my research right now and my inquiries of compensation. So back to Air New Zealand, I submitted another request, and of course this time I'm requesting basically the whole flight itineraries from the ones that were canceled, booked, and of course my final flight. And after a couple of days, Air New Zealand was able to give me that, we'll call it the travel form or itinerary that I needed to give to Avianca. So I contacted Avianca and I gave them the information I was requested, that travel information, and they somehow do like a 180 and tell me that actually the airline, Air New Zealand, needs to give me the information directly. So I'm like, seriously? Keep in mind now, during timeline, this is April 2025. I remember P2 flew his flight on December 31st, 2024. And so I go back to Air New Zealand and I ask them, can you contact Avianca for my compensation case? And I submit another online request, and what happened? Air New Zealand says, no, we don't do that kind of stuff. We don't contact airlines directly for compensation. Sorry, we can't help. Once again, we'll give you more travel information for your flight and see if that helps. So at this point, it's April 2025. I decided to submit another inquiry ticket to Avianca, and it kind of just gets bounced around, like I give them the information from Air New Zealand, the ticket, all that stuff, rebooking, and for basically every week or two, they keep saying to me, no, we're still looking into it, we're still looking into this. I follow every week or two, as you can see here, and we're still working on it, and it looks hopeless, I'm not going to lie. And remember, Monica, the supervisor, said I was not guaranteed compensation, but I had a chance. So after pretty much hopelessness, it's literally July and I'm about to give up, and I get a communication from Avianca on July 3rd. And what did it say? No complications, no issues, here's your points, here's your compensation, 40,000 Avianca life miles, which is a difference from my business class fare. We paid 80,000 minus 40,000 for the economy fare. And I was like, seriously, it actually worked? Indeed it did. And to send off, here's my snapshot when I started, which was basically early in 2025 to the end, July 2025, my 6-month journey. And of course, I'm not lying. Here is Player 2's screenshot of her account. She started around with 80,000 points, booked a business class flight, got it down to less than 1,000 or a couple hundred, and now she has about 40,000 Avianca life miles after this inquiry of getting compensation from the airline. And so those are the steps I took when it comes to flights that were canceled or delayed in regard to getting extra compensation or more in the points and travel game. Let me know about my personal examples and what I did, and if you would do the same as well. I appreciate if you left a comment and if you found it useful as well. As I say in all my videos, make sure to like, subscribe, share my content going forward. Also subscribe to my new travel channel, Long Way Travels. Life is short. Travel more one. I'll see you all in the next video.